Yeah, welcome back to the show, Joe. It's really good to have you again. We always have such great conversations with you. We had a Q&A with you on our show recently, and then we did a podcast interview a little while ago. So for anybody listening who missed those, we'll put links in the show notes. But today we want to focus on talking about the pathways to regenerating the earth. So the specific things that are working when it comes to creating regenerative communities, bioregions, groups of people, projects, sort of all aspects of regeneration from a practical standpoint, which you've been embedded in Colombia for the last little while. So I'd like to hear you talk about that and also the book that you've recently published.
Yeah. Let me start by saying that the name of my book is The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. And I use the word "the" on purpose because in my own journey, I've become convinced that there is only one. There's only one pathway. And the shorthand version of that pathway is we have to create economies that function like living systems that are organized locally around local landscapes. And this naturally emerges as bioregional economies. And if we do that all over the planet, then we can regenerate the entire planet. And so this is, the kind of Cliff Notes version in 30 seconds. And our family moved to Colombia back in November last year, so only about 7 months ago. And we've come a long way in connecting to a set of patterns and activities that are enabling us to practice this design pathway, to walk it with people here locally. And I'm really excited to talk about that with you today.
Cool. Amazing. So what has been your journey like? What are some of the kind of hard lessons that you've learned?
One hard lesson that we've learned is that, and this is one that I think a lot of people are familiar with, is if people who are taking lead roles that you need to collaborate with, if they have problems with money, either under financial stress to keep their organization going or something like this, that you're pretty much guaranteed to fail at collaborating with them. That I've had a long history of really great ideas, really great intellectual connection and resonance, and really bad integration in practice, meaning very poor cooperation, where financial strain is an issue. And that's a really big challenge that we've seen over and over again. And another thing is that when there's a need for transformational change and the system is still functioning, you can't transform it. So there's this paradox that you have to wait until a system is in collapse and then be ready in the midst of the chaos and confusion to create support pathways for transformation. And that's exactly what's happening right now where we live in Barichara in Colombia, because the COVID pandemic back in March, when they locked down the town to stop the spread of the virus. And by the way, there are 0 cases of the virus in Barichara. There's not been a single case in the entire 4 months, but 80% of the local economy comes from tourism. So when they locked down the town, the economy died in a week. In 1 week, it went from a thriving economy to a dead economy. And in the midst of that crisis and collapse is where this transformational pathway is emerging now. And so this is a really important lesson at all scales of regeneration. But it's one that we're discovering the beauty of right now. But beforehand, we would have been scared, like, oh, to think of an economic collapse, that sounds terrible. And it is really hard for a lot of people, but it's in that space that we're able to guide and direct change. So that's a really important lesson that I'd love to unpack further with you today.
So in that space where the economy collapsed, what emerged first? And what are some of the things that emerged a little later? It's interesting to notice that, because I'm thinking about growing up in Soviet Union when that collapsed. The things that emerged first were not necessarily healthy, but then there are things that emerged later that were better adapted. So that's why I'm curious about that.
Yeah, one thing about being in Latin America in the year 2020 is everyone has smartphones and everyone has WhatsApp. And so what happened within the first 4 or 5 days was several WhatsApp groups were created and a lot of community members joined them. One of them was called Support of the Local Economy, so Apoyo Economía. Another one was for Community Resilience. And another one was for organizing efforts around resilience. So sort of a group of organizers formed a group. And a group was created for discussing how to build resilience. And the group of organizers started mapping what was happening based on what they already knew. So some of them had been working with food systems and solidarity relationships with farmers. Others had been working on water security. And so like previously there had been other activities. They just organized very quickly. And within maybe 2 weeks or a little more than 2 weeks, they had created a solidarity food network where 10 farms were delivering food. You know, what we'd call in the US, we'd call it community supported agriculture. Here they call it Mercado de Solidaridad, a solidarity market. But they created this food exchange between about 20 families in the town and about 10 farms in the surrounding countryside to deliver food to people's homes. And so this sort of rapid structuring of solidarity relationships was a key thing that happened within weeks. It was like almost instant. Another thing that happened was the ability to control and regulate things, which Colombia has a long history of violence from its government. So the ability to control things felt strong. Like everyone was afraid to go outside and they didn't want the police to catch them. So, you know, because they didn't want to pay penalties or go to jail because of the virus, and fear spread across the community. But it was really easy to discover how weak the enforcement was. So like an example in my own family, we would break the rules by sneaking out at night with a bucket of compost and my 3-year-old daughter and go to the community food forest to do composting. So we're doing guerrilla gardening. And of course, there's no surveillance because there are like 5 cops in this town of 5,000 people and everyone's overwhelmed. So it's easy to go around the rules and find the space in between. And so there were a lot of people gathering at night to plan for resilience. They were also being mindful of not spreading the virus because in the first few weeks, we didn't know if it was in the town or not. And so there was this kind of mix of people paralyzed by fear, a story of really strong enforcement from the government, and a discovery of blank spots where those institutions just don't exist. So we could find a fluid motion. And the people here have the campesinos in Colombia are very good at finding that place after what was basically a 50-year civil war. So they're very good at going around the militarized enforcement. So all of these things were happening in a very confusing way in the first few weeks.
Was there some sort of an equilibrium that was reached eventually, or is it still changing?
Yeah, there was a pattern that arose for about 2.5 months where those of us who think systemically, from like day one, we're saying, wait, the rainy season's about to start and we have a water scarcity problem and everyone has to stay indoors. How can we organize work parties to build water retention systems? And so after 2 months of feeling that way with no action, what happened was most of the town everyone sort of in the rumor mill started complaining and being afraid, what are we going to do about water, but no action. So there was this sort of normalcy within the chaos that arose, but it was a collective paralysis. And what began to happen, and my family was leading this within our own set of families that we're friends with, was another parallel thing, is kids below the age of 6 were strictly forbidden from leaving the house under any condition. And up to this day, children are not allowed out of the house below the age of 6. So parents have started finding ways to meet with their neighbors who have kids that are friends, because it's extremely unhealthy to isolate children and keep them in their homes for multiple months. So we started meeting with our neighbors who also have a 3-year-old daughter. And by hanging out together while our kids played, we started thinking about things we could do. And we, after a little while, started going and digging ponds and canals and things to catch the water because the rain started to come. And so what we started to see was a self-organized action within families connected to land because we had this community food forest that we could walk to from our house without the police seeing us. And actually, my daughter and I got caught by the police. If you can imagine our 3-year-old daughter being documented, and they're taking photos as we're taking compost to this food forest. It's sort of hilarious. We're gonna have great stories to tell when she's an adult. But these sort of patterns of the old system being weak and the self-organizing pattern of people taking action is what began to happen.
And so where do you think is the momentum going now? Because whenever there's this break in the old system, the flow of energy redirects. So where do you feel that's going now?
It's going in 2 directions, and we don't know which one is going to win. One direction is that we have a pretty incompetent mayor, and the previous mayor of the town was deeply corrupt and actually sent to prison. And so there's sort of a history that the government is either inept or corrupt. And there's a water crisis where the mayor is saying, let's just dig deeper wells, which would destroy the aquifers that are already damaged. So there's this story of incompetence and poorly thought out action. And we could default into water privatization and destruction of the aquifers, which is related to food security issues and other things. This sort of lack of imagination and lack of empowerment to transform things. And there's a lot of inertia for that. At the same time, there is a pattern organizing among several of us. And I want to be careful that it doesn't sound like I'm leading all this organizing, because my family is still mostly outsiders. We've only lived here for 7 months. Most of the organizing is local people, Colombians from the town, that are doing a lot of this work. We just are becoming friends with them and starting to get involved. But for example, last week, a community water commission was created with the blessing of the mayor's office. But the mayor's office doesn't have any money, doesn't have any staff resourcing. So there's this community group working on water that now has sort of the permission from the mayor to do work with the city, which allows the city to start to build a story of competence. While this committee is a group of people who really know systemic water issues. So they're like doing permaculture, water retention systems, agroforestry and agroecology, working with 15 farms, like really good work. And so we have this potential right now for this set of solutions that they've been developing, these people on their farms, to showcase them and replicate them across the entire landscape. And so we're moving into a place of potential for regenerating the entire territory.
The brand new Future Thinkers members portal is now live. Develop your sovereignty and self-knowledge with our in-depth courses, get access to our weekly sense-making calls, join the Q&As with past podcast guests, and much more. Become a Future Thinkers member today at futurethinkers.org/members. Enter the Future Thinkers giveaway and win our brand new community membership, including in-depth courses, private calls, and more, as well as a supply of Qualia, a complete cognitive upgrade for your brain. To enter the contest, simply go to futurethinkers.org/giveaway and sign up for our mailing list to instantly get our 50-page guide on how to adapt to the future. There are many ways to increase your chances of winning. Enter the competition today.